Joining me on the podcast is TV personality, online fitness and nutrition coach David Birtwistle. Several years ago, David came up to me and said something that left a mark, and is why I hold him in such high regard. In this episode, we discuss what defines masculinity, and if it's something that must be adaptable. We chat about understanding gratification within the process and not just the outcome, and how we should look at failure as the first step to succeeding. David's attention for years was very much focused on strength. Now his passion for running makes him a very versatile athlete. His ambitions of running his first sub-3 hour marathon are edging closer. But is the desire to achieve this going to distract him from enjoying the process? In this conversation, you'll find out. Guys, I'm incredibly proud to say that my first book, Fortune Favours the Brave, published by Penguin, is now in stores to purchase, or you can order your copy online. The book consists of 76 short lessons on finding strength in vulnerability. Adversity is something you will inevitably face in life. I wrote this book to share and showcase how to process that and what can come from it. Adversity is something we wish would never happen to us, but it does. I want you to understand, though, that it can inspire you to achieve incredible things, not just for yourself, but for others too. Everyone on this earth is born amazing at something. It is just a case of finding out what that is. Life is incredibly short and valuable, so make it count. You may find that you don't believe in your ability or fearful to test yourself. By the end of this book, I believe you will. To get yourself a copy now, it can be purchased at Waterstones, Amazon, or by simply clicking the link on my Instagram bio, Joshua_Patterson_JP now. David, welcome, brother.
Thanks very much. Nice to be here.
Here we are, my man. How you feeling?
I'm good. I'm excited for Christmas.
Do you know what? That's a question, right, that we often get asked. Have you ever been asked that question where somebody said, how are you feeling? Are you okay? And you've not said, I'm okay.
I can't, only if it would be someone that I really love and is really close to me and I felt safe.
It's
but
interesting.
Most of the time, you just go, yeah, no, I'm fine.
Because I had that the other day where somebody asked me that question, and for the first time, and they weren't necessarily someone, I knew particularly well. And I actually responded, was like, no, I'm not okay. But do you know what? Things will be fine in time. And that were like, okay, good to know. Like it wasn't a deep conversation, but I just, for the first time, I was like, I just didn't really feel like just saying yes the whole time,
Just living in your true, authentic self, as people say.
100%. And I think that for some people, sometimes can maybe make them feel a little bit uncomfortable, but maybe it's just normalizing that sometimes it's not always all right.
Yeah, most people are not all right all the time.
Yeah. But do you know what? When I was thinking about getting you on, with each conversation, it's like, what are the key focuses, I guess, or what do you want to get from it? And I think, our relationship and how we kind of met one another, I think is what really inspired this particular conversation, and I guess how things have evolved. And for me, it always leads back to really the first time we properly met at that panel discussion. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do actually. I do, yeah. That was around Christmas time years ago.
Many years ago. And that for me was just such a poignant moment where I think my respect for you as an individual was and is still so unbelievably high, because it's not something typically most men would do. When you look at an individual like yourself, it's funny how you may have an interpretation of someone, but probably be unaware of how they may think or feel about you.
Yeah.
And physically, you've got a big stature, you're a confident guy, but I actually think as an individual, sometimes you can be a hard person to potentially read. And with mixed signals, that's where I guess the misinterpretation maybe can come from.
Yeah.
And I remember you coming up to me at the end of that event, and you said, listen, I just wanted you to know, if you don't mind me saying,
yeah, sure.
I feel intimidated by you. And I said, what do you mean? You really threw me off with that remark. And you were like, well, just, the things that you've done, I felt like I wanted to come over and speak to you about it. And in that moment, that just broke away every boundary I think there possibly was, and we ended up having a conversation about that. And that's something that I probably have never really done with someone, and I think would probably feel more inspired to do, because
I don't know. I really admired you for having the strength to do something like that, because as men, that's not something you would typically do.
No, and it was an interesting one because I don't think that I'd ever really been aware of that feeling properly before. Like the idea that I was consciously aware of an emotion. I think previously I would have just like pushed it down and like walked off or something like that. But I think it's because like we're quite similar in that we're both into health and fitness, and you'd just done the challenge. I think was the wheelchair challenge.
Yeah, John O'Groats to Land's End.
John O'Groats to Land's End wheelchair, and I was like, wow, like I really wanted to do some sort of like crazy fitness event for like my own self progression. And so you're on a panel talking about this, and I was like, this guy's good looking. He's done something really amazing. He's got lots of like exposure. I'm like, I feel intimidated. That's really strange. Because to a lot of people, they might perceive me as being like really confident. And so I thought, do you know what? I'll just talk to you about it. And you seem like a very receptive person. So let's just how else to break the ice? Just be honest.
Masculinity is such an interesting topic of conversation. Like, what if I asked you that question, like what does masculinity look like to you?
I think it's quite hard to define. I think that a lot of people would have different opinions on what it is, and it's maybe more contentious a question than it ever has been, right?
It's a bit of a taboo topic,
it is,
right?
I mean, to me, I think I can't remember who said this. And it's effectively like a quote from someone. I can't remember who it is. And if you guys are listening, know who this is, please feel free to let us know. But it was, be the guy that will ask the girl out, and if she says no, still walk her home. And I thought, that's it. That's really what it is. And it should be, at least in my eyes, to be a gentleman, is like, be confident enough and sure enough about yourself that you will approach a lady or a guy, whoever, whatever your interest, and have the confidence to put yourself out there and take a risk and do something that makes you feel uncomfortable, not knowing what the outcome's going to be, right? And then if you don't get the desired outcome and your feelings are hurt, then you are man enough to be able to still hold yourself to a high regard and still be polite and be courteous and have a role where you might want to just still be a nice guy to this person. And I was like, that quote really kind of made me think about how I might want to try and raise my future children, is around that idea of it. And it's so you can extrapolate that concept because obviously that's an example, but you could extrapolate it over everything, right? Like effectively put yourself out there. You don't know what the outcome's going to be. And if it goes well, then fantastic. But if it doesn't go so well, then don't be a little bitch about it. Just like take it on the chin, learn from it, move forward, and still hold yourself high. And that's it's kind of how I would look at it now these days, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think with masculinity, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I don't think it can be one singular thing. Because I think based on your background, your profession, for instance, I think the interpretation could be very different. In all honesty, how can you compare someone who does a 9-to-5 job to, say, typically someone from the special forces? Masculinity is going to be programmed very differently. And, to one individual, their interpretation of masculinity to someone else would be perceived as toxic male masculinity.
Yeah, well, I think that's because everybody perceives things in their own way, right? Like you and I can have a conversation and I can say one thing to you with all the best intentions, and then you will put that sentence through your life experience and your filter, and you will interpret what I've said in a way that works for you. And it might be that you take it completely the opposite way. And like any guy that's had a conversation with their partner can know that this would happen, where you say something with the best intentions, but then they may hear it in a different way. And so then what's toxic masculine to one person might be exactly what someone else needs, if we're going to talk about the special forces and maybe their version of masculinity. And obviously, like, massive respect to people in the armed forces. It's insane what you guys do. but someone might find that really intense. But I think what I'm realizing, it's about doing the right thing in the moment, about what the situation is, whatever the environment is that you're in. There's a time and a place to act in a certain way. And so maybe it's about choosing the right way to act given the environment, and maybe being a chameleon so that you can float between them. Because if you're in an environment which actually needs a bit more of a passive approach and you come in all guns blazing, then that's not going to work. But vice versa, if you're in an environment where you need to make fast decisions and take action really quickly and you don't, then you might die. Right? So
You absolutely nailed that. I think it's about adaptability, isn't it?
Yeah.
The awareness of your environment, also the way you need to articulate yourself to a particular person. You know, the way you navigate it with one is probably going to have to be very different to another. Because I think actually when you misread signals, you know, hypothetically, if you hadn't have come up to me that day and said what you did, and, you know, your presence or your energy comes off very differently, it would have been so I mean, we will never know, but, you know, hypothetically, how different could the dynamic in that relationship have been, you know, if I have this interpretation of you, which is the furthest thing from it. And I just wonder how many people out there in this world have found themselves in that situation where unfortunately they've gone down a path when it could have been such a different outcome. And that's why I think this topic right now that we're discussing is so interesting, because I really do hope that it could potentially be a trigger for a lot of people in a really positive way to maybe look at things differently. You know, I've spoken about this a lot, where I've had a lot of males in particular, you know, with my challenges, the logic behind what I do is to go very much towards the extreme end of the spectrum. But that is just the formula I see that works with a lot of males in particular, where that's the sort of level that they respect. And by doing that, they're more inclined to listen to the things that you have to say. So it's about meeting in the middle almost. And so a lot of males then come to you and you're almost defining what masculinity to them actually is. And I think that's a good thing. I actually had a conversation recently with a friend of mine who finds himself in a relationship, and they're really struggling in that dynamic right now because one's incredibly vocal and the other one isn't. And, you know, the partner's parent has categorically forbidden them from going to therapy.
Oh, wow.
So how is that individual meant to evolve as a person? Because again, that individual may find themselves being a product of their environment, have the ability to evolve and develop from that, but then still be dictated by the environment of how they should be. And that's when I think you find yourself in a really challenging position. And I guess a lot of us can be a product of our environments, of I guess, you know, the interpretation of how things should be done in the past. But I'd like to think that we really are evolving for the future.
Hopefully. There's another saying, again, I don't know who said this, but it's if I was born where you were born and I've lived what you had lived, then I would think what you think. And so it kind of pulls together the, you know, your innate human nature, but then also the lived experiences of life, and then that creates the belief. And then someone else basically, again, I've got all of these quotes that I think I don't know who said them.
Do you know what? Just pass them off as your own. Unless somebody sends in a really aggressive message being like, that's mine, just go ahead with it. I came up with this quote actually on Sunday when I was, you know, saving a village from a burning fire.
That's it, man. That's it. And basically it's like, it's really, really hard to be mad at someone. It's almost impossible to be mad at someone if you truly understand them. And that again comes to if, you know, it's people's experiences and where they were born and all of that shape who they are and what they think. And so once you if someone says something, you're mad at that thing that they've said, well, you don't understand where it comes from. And if you understand where it comes from, eventually you'll get to a point and you'll go, it makes sense now. And so with the friends of yours that are, you know, forbidden to go to therapy, at the moment, the way I kind of see it with communication and human relationships is that there's like, you can be really connected, but then there can be a disconnect caused by miscommunication or a difference of opinion or something. And you separate, and there's this metaphorical gap between the two of you. because you're not aligned on what you're thinking and how each other feel and stuff. And so by talking and sometimes needing a third party to mediate that conversation, you're able to understand each other and build metaphorical bridges to the other person and then reconnect. God, my metaphors are on fire today. That was brilliant. God, that was quality, wasn't it? In my head, I'm like, you fucking nailed that. You like come together. It's because like I think about it, like I'm a bit autistic, right? I've like been doing these tests. And so like I see things in the world in like patterns. Like I'm really quite good at recognizing patterns, and sometimes I can like sit back, and human interaction is quite pattern orientated. People kind of do the same sort of things, and there'll be like a trigger which causes a result and a reaction. And so like I kind of sit back and I think about it, and then there'll be a way my brain kind of goes, oh, that's like this other thing that you know, which is more physical. And then you can kind of take that physical thing and create a metaphor around it. And so with human interaction, I see it that when you do get separated, and we use the terms, right? When you're separated or you feel disconnected from someone, it's because you've literally drifted apart emotionally. And then you need to build that bridge by having a conversation and understanding each other. And then you can come back together.
When do you think you've had that first defining moment where that may have come to light? Because like you said, if you are sometimes a product of your environment, so if that's all you've ever known, you have to be exposed to an external influence in order to have the opportunity to grow or evolve from that.
I don't know if there's a specific like turning point as such, but I do remember years ago, and it was around the time when I met you, and Ben Bidwell was really like talking a lot about masculinity, and it started to make me think. So that was kind of one of the first like tipping points of like listening to him talk about it, and then yourself, and I was like, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah, so Ben Bidwell is better known as the Naked Professor, and he's someone that you and I both know incredibly well. And you know what? He's a really interesting one because he is an acquired taste. You know, for I think you have to be emotionally on his level to really appreciate the work that he does. And if you're not, and this isn't me saying that if you're surface level, but unless you are of that level, that's not to disregard how certain people are. Some will find his work intense or probably quite cringe.
Yeah.
And that frustrates me, to be honest with you, because actually I think what he's doing is phenomenal. And also he's much older. So his experiences and wisdom in life, you know, are much further on than certain people. And I think it's amazing that a male can be so honest. And actually, do you know what? He's unapologetically himself. And I think by doing that, he's going to draw exactly the right people in his life that he wants to be with, including the correct partner. I think it's when you are a fabrication of yourself, that's when you probably find yourself in a situation where you're going, I don't really familiarize myself with these individuals. It's because that's the I guess the persona that you've put out there, and I feel very grateful that he's come into my life. Actually, some of the best conversations I've had are with him.
Yeah, he's a good man. I like it, and I do agree with you. I think there's like a spectrum of like what resonates with guys, and if that's like the demographic that we're talking about here, then you'll have some people which are a bit further along in their personal development journey, where they're more open to maybe a bit more cringy ideas, which we would actually just see as like a bit more emotional, probably a bit more available, a bit deeper. And then you've got like, let's say Ben's at one end, and then you know, coming through there, you're further towards the other end, but you're quite centralized, if I'm honest. Like you kind of have both sides of you, don't you? Like you've got the I'm going to run around the entire world, and then you've got the much deeper side of you too. So there's like a contrast to it, which I think is a good thing, because we need to have that. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum, which might be like the SAS guy, Ant Middleton.
Yeah.
He does stuff, but right on the far end of the spectrum too. So you've got that, and I think it's good to have different people, because different people react with each other in a way that is required to get the end result. So
I think what's really interesting about you is when you look at a much younger age. So, you know, you had represented England at under 16s, and you were signed to Wasps, and Wasps at that time were an absolute powerhouse in rugby.
Yeah, European champions at the time.
You had all the potential in the world for the most exciting future, and that was what was set in the stars. Like, that was the future for you, was to become a full-time professional. And like many individuals, life throws curveballs, and unfortunately you sustained, quite a major injury, which potentially could have dictated the future and how you would respond to it. Now, what I think is incredibly admirable about yourself, Bud, is actually how you approach that situation. A lot of people, when they find themselves in that scenario, can come off very bitter, and some never really recover from something like that. Instead, it was almost like a real education for you. Do you look at that moment and think, I wish life was different? I hadn't sustained that injury, and to this day, I would have been that professional rugby player? Or do you look at that moment and go, do you know what? That was meant to be?
I don't know if I've ever been asked that question before, making me think. So I tore my ACL completely, which is one of the main ligaments in your knee, when I was 17. And it was the start of my second year with Wasps. And at the end of that year is when you theoretically go pro. And I was already semi-pro at the time. And they were like, we really think you're going to be a professional player. But then I remember having the conversation with the guys that were like going to potentially give me a contract, and they're like, yeah, we're sorry, because of your injury, like you just haven't been able to progress to the level we want you to be at. So it was like a real literal, this happened, therefore this did not happen. It's an interesting one, because I think that rugby's been through the professional rugby game has been through a lot of change in England over the last 15 years, and Wasps no longer exist, which is crazy. Obviously, England had just kind of come off winning the World Cup about 5 years before. So 2003, won the World Cup, everything's super high. So I was at this like level of, I'm looking at Johnny Wilkinson and I want to be on his team. Like, I'm looking at Josh Lucy and these guys that are real superstars. And and Jason Robinson was like my hero. Will Greenwood, right? These guys that are just legends of English rugby. And then that just got taken away. And it was the realization of, right, well, that dream just no longer is reality for you. You are now a cliche, the rugby player that got injured, right? And I was kind of lost in my way, but the beauty of it is that going through that experience of training full time and really pushing myself, and actually having the injury really taught me that when you're dealt a shit hand, you can still work really hard to try and make up for it. So even though I didn't get the contract for the 6 months after I got the injury, I had never been so solo-minded. I'd never been so focused on anything but getting fit. It was the only thing I cared about. And it was like this absolute single-mindedness, which is really, really important. It's actually taught me that, like, yes, it's great to have balance. I mean, it's great to have balance if you want to just be comfortable, right? But if you want to make fast progress in one direction, you've got to be really focused. You've got to be really narrow-minded, basically. You've got to have that like absolute mindset of like, what's the priority? What's the thing I'm going after? And then does the thing that I'm talking about here help or hinder that goal? And it's allowed me, that attitude has allowed me to really focus on growing my coaching business endeavor and take that to a place where I never thought it would get to, and it's still growing, which is amazing. It's allowed me to go back to university. So I did a strength and conditioning degree after I finished Wasps, and that gave me the foundations of my business. But then I also went back to uni and did an engineering degree and got a first class honours in petroleum engineering about 3 years after that, which is a whole other story. But without that mindset of being focused, I would never have been able to achieve that. And I have just applied and had an interview for an MBA at Imperial, which is a business master's, which I would not have been able to apply for had I not done the engineering degree. Now, I don't know if I've got in yet, but maybe by the time this comes out, I might find out. But it is one of those things where everything's a stepping stone. And I had a conversation with my brother the other day about being uncertain of like career, being uncertain of where does this path lead me? And it made me think about myself and realize that when I was 18 and just been released from WASP, I had no idea where I was going to go, what I was going to do, who I was going to be. And I've just tried to make the best decision at the time, given the information I've got. And one thing has led into the next thing, has led into the next thing, has led into the next thing. And yes, there may be some careers which are very predefined, right? You might have these big companies like the NHS, for example, where at the start, you know, if you get this qualification, you do this degree, and then you do this thing, then it goes to this, and you go up to. And by 40, you're going to be a consultant, right? You can kind of map it out. But for a lot of jobs and people, that's just not the reality. And I think it was something that I was sold, especially as a teenager and like as a kid, was like, you need to know what you're going to do. You need to know what GCSEs you're going to do. I don't know if they're still good GCSEs, but GCSEs, A-levels, you need to know what degree you're going to get because you need to know what job you're going to have and where you're going to be at 40. And that just never like resonated with me because I didn't know what I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. And I think a lot of people also have that same feeling. They don't really know where it's going to be. And I'm sure that your life is not where you imagined it would be when you were 18. I bet it's quite different to that.
This week's episode is sponsored by Runner. Runner is a personalized running coaching app helping runners of all abilities train for any goal. From a first 5K to a marathon, even an ultra marathon. When the time is right for you, your plan can be created within a minute and ready to go. With each plan, Runner provides all the help a runner requires, including strength and conditioning, and you can also reach out to the team at any time via the support tab inside the app. For a 2-week free trial on any personalized running plan, use the code PHOENIX. No matter your goal, Runner is there to help you achieve it.
Do I circle back? Yes. Do I regret it? Do I wish it never happened? Hard to know, because what if I'd have been one of those rugby players that got the contract and just kept pushing and then never really made it big? Because in rugby, unless you're playing for England or you're really a good regular starter in a Premiership team that's doing really well, the pay isn't fantastic. And the injury risk is really high. You might get, concussions are a really big problem in rugby. So I could have been the guy that had played rugby till he's 35, had multiple concussions, broken bones, and then what do you do if all you've done is play rugby? Now I see that I've got this opportunity in life, that I'm at this stage where I'm really starting to enjoy the more business behind coaching, behind, what I do. And I'm starting to like reach out and branch into other businesses as well, which is now a really exciting thing. And that's where I'm like, oh, now I'm about to maybe go into this whole new chapter of life, which there's no way I would have known about doing. And I think that a lot of people, hopefully they'll take comfort in hearing that, because I don't know if anyone might look at me and think he probably had this all figured out. Well, I fucking did not. That is a fact.
I think there's two things. I think it's accepting and it's making the most of each opportunity, right? So accepting whatever comes your way, because sometimes it's out of your control. That injury was out of your control. And, I think it's a case of some might have gone, my biggest regret is if you make the most of every game, of every opportunity, of every session, of every connection you make, what really is there to regret? You made the most, whether that lasted a month, 6 months, or a year. The reality is you still had an opportunity to experience something that some dream of even doing that, to even get into the academy, bud. There are so few people on this earth that will even have that. So in a sense, you were fulfilling a dream that others wish they had. So I guess it's just changing your outlook on it. I think also when you look at your situation now, your soon-to-be wife, if you look at the way that your career's gone, if you look at your opportunities that have gone onto television, you can't say you wouldn't for sure have had these opportunities or met these individuals, had the story been different in rugby, but quite likely it probably would have. So I guess the emphasis isn't necessarily to focus too much on the past, but actually just look at the present and go, well, actually what life has shown me is that I've had the ability to adapt to something completely new, but also you have the ability to invest in multiple different things. Maybe my identity wasn't just to be a rugby player. You know, for me, it was to be a PT, or it was to be a coach. Now it's to be a businessman. I think that's really exciting. And I think to anyone that's listening to that, they can take a huge amount of inspiration, because we're all going to find ourselves at some point, even if we're deeply passionate about something, questioning whether that was the right decision or if we want to make a change, which I think is good, because I think in life we evolve, don't we? You know, what once was the dream reality, we either can achieve it and actually probably be slightly disappointed by it, or that outlook can be changed based on, you know, the impact of maybe an individual or something in general in life. I found that, you know, when you've asked me that question about how do I look at life, that's a really interesting point you made there, because I don't know if it's imposter syndrome, but I often look at what I've got and it feels, I don't know if the word, it feels like a bit of a joke is the correct way of saying it, but like for a person with no qualifications at all, like two GCSEs, I think, 3 GCSEs, 1 A level, no university degree, and I'm sat here right now with the career that I've had, to me in my head doesn't seem justified when I think of the hours people have put into their studies and, you know, the education that they've had. It's like, should someone have deserved this more than I? Maybe that's the wrong way of looking at it, because ultimately the sacrifice and the graft that has gone in for me to get to this point is unquestionable. But equally, you know, my I guess my qualities aren't necessarily the degrees that I have or qualification. Sometimes it's just you yourself.
What I picture is like, what you're trying to say is your end product, it's like, it's too good to be true. The reality of your life is that you're wildly successful, but if you're going to base success on academia, which is what we're brought up to believe is the most important thing, right? Because that was definitely what I was brought up to believe, is like your grades are like determine your success. It's the only thing that matters, is like how good you are at school. But what I realize is that the rules of life and the game of life is such that there are many things which provide value to people, and being academically smart is very important. And I certainly have invested in it in my life multiple times with time, effort, and money. And because I believe that it really helps me personally to progress. But there are many other things which are valuable. And I think that's what I'm realizing now, is that you get typically you get rewarded based on the value that you provide to other people. So you might be able to provide academic value. You might be really smart and be able to solve specific problems, and therefore you're really valuable to certain people because of that. You might be a TV personality, and therefore you provide a lot of value in the form of entertainment, and therefore you get remunerated accordingly. And then there's other things, you know, sportsman, for example, you provide a lot of value to the team because you're able to win a cup, and that's great for the team. There's a few things which I see that this doesn't always equate. And if you're a doctor, you might, in the NHS, you might be thinking, well, I'm really smart and I save lives, but I don't make loads of money, right? Which doesn't make sense in my eyes, but it is part of the ecosystem, obviously, within that space. You could probably theorize that if there was many health providers and it wasn't a centralized service, that there would be competition, and therefore the doctors would get paid more, but then it would also cost more to the user. So that's a whole different conversation. But fundamentally, you get rewarded based on the value that you present to other people. And if you don't think that you're being rewarded fairly, it's because you're not actually bringing the value to other people that you perceive that you are giving.
Yeah, 100%. But also I think the way that we're programmed, I had a really interesting conversation with my therapist actually yesterday, where I said, I'm really struggling right now to have the ability to promote the things that I'm doing. I feel so much more comfortable and invested in promoting and supporting other people. And she said, how are you programmed? And I was like, what do you mean by that? She was like, throughout your childhood, was the focus on yourself? And I said, no, it was always on other people. And she said, well, there's your answer. Your programming is to emphasize the attention and the needs of others and not your own. Therefore, even to this day, it's still going to feel alien to you. And I never really looked at it like that. And that for me was really interesting. And how do I try and reprogram that? Because like you said, I think the value is through my own life experiences and how I can share those. And maybe that's why the challenges in particular have thrived, because that's an environment that I feel comfortable in and enables me to articulate myself. Whereas if you just stick a camera in front of my face, or I'm doing a self-tape, for instance, it feels so alien. Like, how long have we been doing this game for? And still to this day, it doesn't necessarily work. But, I could be sat here with you right now and expressing that to you in a different format where I feel comfortable.
Do you think that that's going to change? Do you think that you'll get to a point where you are able to like become a bit more self-focused?
I think sometimes you just have to accept the things that you feel comfortable with and the things that sometimes you don't necessarily. And I guess it's just tailoring a solution that works, because I think sometimes it is good to step out of that comfort zone, right?
I would say that most people are very comfortable though, in the sense of maybe not like, if we're talking to financial struggles, maybe not financially comfortable in that sense, right? But comfortable in that everything in life is designed around like taking pain away and creating as much of a comfortable place as possible. And the thing that I'm really very aware of is that nothing good comes in life from just being comfortable. And that might not be that you have to do something like run 73 marathons, 73, 74, 72?
76.
76. So it's not like you have to run 76 marathons in 76 days, but it's about like delayed gratification being the most important thing. Like investing into something that doesn't make you initially feel good and doing it for long enough to then get the payoff. Because what I'm realizing is that if you have a short feedback cycle, a short loop of like, I have to do a thing and I need to see a positive benefit of that in the short term before I continue, that basically like the shorter that loop is, the easier it is to do, but the smaller the reward that you get for it. And the bigger the loop, so how long can you go without getting a positive reward for something, the bigger the payoff. And it's not that like if 1 unit of time gives you 1 and 2 units give you 2, it's like 1 unit of time delay gives you 1, but 2 units of time give you 4. It's an exponential difference. And I think that that's what I've become so aware of in why I've been able to get to my point in life. And I'm absolutely not, in my eyes, still successful yet. I'm still growing, but I've seen in the last year, maybe it's like starting to uptick. Like the reward of that long-term investment is starting to pay off. And it's the same with my fiance, who has just announced her 4th book. And I've seen her writing that book over the last year.
Isn't that impressive?
Oh, it's amazing.
4th book.
4th book, mate, honestly. And it's called Not Just the Period, available in all good bookstores, mainly Waterstones. I think it's coming out early next year. And, Dr. Hazel Wallace on Instagram. And, but like I've seen, that's the one, exactly. And I've seen her like put in so much work into this, right, and not get any feedback, and just go and go and go, like hours and hours and days and days and days. And it's been so hard on top of all the other work that she's been doing. And, she's handed it in and she's like, oh, I finished. And then she gets, boom, loads of reviews, loads of notes, loads of edits to change. Like, oh my God, I've got to do more weeks, more work. And then the same thing happens again and again and again. And it's been like 11 months now of graft. And the reward isn't there yet. She's still not got the reward. People haven't even read it. Do you know what I mean? And it won't be until next year when it actually comes out. And then who knows even what the reward is going to be, right? Because in books, you don't actually make that much money for the amount of time and effort and, what you put into it, relative to if you were doing that with something else, right? With the same exposure that Hazel has. And so, we keep talking about it, but like, if you are thinking to yourself, oh, I have to put in all that effort writing a book. I have to do all of the research. I have to write hundreds of pages. It's not like a dissertation at uni. It's like 20 dissertations if you've been to university, like, and you don't get any payoff for ages. If you're not willing to do the work, you're not going to get the result out of it. But the more that you're willing to stretch your payoff, the bigger the reward is going to be. But we are fed constant gratification on social media. Everything is fast. Everything is easy. There's no effort required to do anything these days. It is making people weaker and more feeble and less resilient and less able to endure hard times to get the result.
You made a really strong point recently that one of your desires with the people that you connect with is that you can change their mindset from having to do something to being able to do it. And I think that's a really important point to make, because actually, how often in life do we go, oh God, I really don't want to do this? But actually, I know it's all relative, but when you actually reflect on the things that we are capable of doing, like running, you know, Tano, my best friend, is my constant reminder. This is a man who was told he would never walk again. He'll never be able to run. He is able to walk to a degree with the support of crutches. And so when I find myself in a situation where I'm like, oh God, I really don't want to do this run, it's that reminder of like, what I don't want to do is somebody else's dream.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I see that.
You know, and how do you find people have reacted, I guess, to that desired effect with that mindset? Do you think people have responded to that positively?
Everyone responds to it typically positively, but it's an abstract concept for most people because it forces you to change your perspective on something. And if you are looking, if you're looking from the outside onto a new perspective and you don't actually own that perspective, it's really abstract, isn't it? But if you embody that perspective, then it's really easy. So I think when you initially present the idea of like changing your perspective on something, it can seem really abstract and people don't reject it, but it's like, that's a great idea in practice, but what's the reality? But I think what it is like, if you're waiting for the reward at the end, and that's the only thing motivating you, and some people can't wait, but it's about how you tie the process to the end goal. Like you said, it'd be great if we could love the process. Well, there's a lot of things you're not really going to love, but you just have to do them. You just have to get on with it. But why would you do it? And it's because you are like connecting the action with either the person you want to be or the goal you want to achieve or the result you want to get. And so do you truly fall in love with the process? Like I've been to the gym since I was 15 and I'm 34. So it's 19 years. Do I love picking up heavy things in the gym? No, I don't actually love it. Like the actual process of like lifting a weight, it's heavy, it's uncomfortable, my muscles hurt. Like what's more comfortable is lying in bed and eating pancakes and like having a cup of coffee on the sofa. Like that is way more comfortable.
We know what you're doing in bed. Come on, this guy trying to pass, he's having pancakes. We all know what we get up to in that solo time.
So like, is it that you fall in love with the process? I don't know, but it's that I think that what it is that I associate a process with an identity. And that's what it is. It's not that I fall in love in the process as such. It's like, who do I want to be? Who am I? Who do I perceive myself to be? And if I perceive myself to be hardworking, if I perceive myself to always follow through on what I say I'm going to do I perceive myself as an intelligent person? Do I perceive myself as someone who's kind? If that's how I perceive myself, then I'm going to act towards those behaviors. If I perceive myself as dumb, if I perceive myself as not hardworking, as a flake, as having low confidence, then I'm not going to do things that challenge that unless someone pushes me to do things that challenge that or change my belief about who I am.
That's interesting because I love the process. I love it. I feel grateful to be able to have it. And it's the thing that I look forward to the most. Like with every challenge, you know, like Reese, who's here behind the camera, you know, or Chris Taylor, like I love the fact that I can call them for the first time and be like, I've I've got the idea, guys. And then it's implementing the idea. It's the challenging task of trying to convince different brands to want to get behind this and what that relationship looks like. It's the new training that we have to implement and how it's different every single time based on the distance or terrain that I'm going to be faced with. It's the shift in mindset and how I go into a space that I so rarely get to be. It's the feeling of fulfillment. It's the feeling of being at peace because I'm just like one track mindset rather than it being so distorted and, confusing most of the time. And often like the outcome, which is to cross the finish line, it's not, I wouldn't say it's anticlimactic, but I'm so emotionally exhausted from the process that moment in time isn't always necessarily what I once envisioned it would be. Sometimes actually the acknowledgement of what you've just accomplished can sometimes for me take years.
Yeah. Well, do you know what I think is that when we're kids, right, we are rewarded every year for being alive, basically. You have a birthday party. Most people have a birthday party, or at least you get a present or something. You're made to feel special once a year, and that's effectively a reward for being alive, right? Whereas when you're an adult, you do all of these things every single day. You're paying your bills, you're going to work, you're dealing with stuff happening in life, you're fighting battles, personal, family, financial, you're dealing with all of this shit. And maybe you have done something and you've put yourself in a position where you've taken a risk and you've made yourself uncomfortable and you've found a thing that you're really working on. You're not just getting by, you're not just surviving, you're putting yourself in a position where you can potentially thrive. Your challenges are a really good example of this, a metaphor for it, because they're quite far on the extreme. But to someone else, it might be going to evening classes at college to get a further education, right? Or it could be, trying extra hard to get a promotion at work. But then the reality is that when you're an adult, that reward is never as good as what you think it's going to be. So like crossing the finish line, finishing the challenge isn't the pinnacle, right? Like Hazel submitting her book, the feeling of submitting it isn't what you might perceive it to be, right? Getting a degree might make you feel good in the short term, but is it 4 years of uncomfortable good? Is it better than the net negative feeling of being uncomfortable? No, not really. What I'm realizing about being an adult is that the outcome, the time you do the thing and you get the result that you want, the feeling you get from that is not as good as you think it's going to be. Now, that doesn't mean don't do it. It just means that if the thing you're chasing is like the feeling of celebration, someone throwing a party for you, like, oh my God, you're the best thing ever. Like you've just ran 76 marathons, like the whole of the UK comes out to like celebrate and it's like this huge thing. Like maybe for some people that might happen once in life, but for all of the other things that you have to really work at, you don't get the reward. What I realized is that if you want to progress through life and play the game of life where we're trying to grow effectively, we're trying to grow. It might be you're trying to grow financially. You might be trying to grow emotionally. You might be trying to grow within your relationship. We're trying to grow and develop in some capacity. It's not the destination. Oh my God, it's so cheesy, isn't it? But it's not the destination that's the thing. It's doing the thing that makes you the person to do the next thing. And the payoff is being the person that can do the thing. And that's what I'm realizing.
I agree. I mean, I think the word for me when I cross that finish line is probably relief. More than anything is the fact that you have tested yourself and gone against everything that a lot of people believe is possible and you've accomplished it. And it's a big gamble financially, physically, mentally, and you've managed to override every single one of those to get to that point. And so I think the initial reaction for me is relief, then it's pride.
Pride's a huge one. Pride, overcoming hard things.
Again, being patient with that process.
Yeah.
Don't beat yourself up for not feeling that instant gratification. Take time. Like I said, it can sometimes take me years to get to that point. I'm really interested, Bud, to know with like your new investment into running, what your biggest learnings have been coming into this, because I think that's a journey that so many people are invested in now, and maybe can complicate, I guess, the process that they go through, because I think the targets that they may set themselves could be much further on than maybe where they necessarily may be. And so I guess it's just, have you found yourself being patient with the process, or do you think you've kind of thrown yourself in at the deep end? Because, when you look at some of the accomplishments you've achieved recently with some of the times, some of the personal bests you've got, it's pretty phenomenal in a condensed period of time, what you've done.
So I did my first marathon during lockdown. Like a lot of people kind of got into running a bit then. And it wasn't an official marathon. I just ran around laps of Clapham Common. And it's about a 3-kilometer loop. And so that took me 4 hours, right? So for perspective. So 4 hours to do my first marathon. And then I did London this year in 3 hours 12 officially, 3:09 on Strava. Shout out Strava. And then since then I've done a half. I think what was my time? 1:23. I have to double check that. But 1 hour 23-minute half marathon. 21, 1:20 actually at the Oxford recently. 1:20. And so that's quite a big jump in a few years. I definitely did overshoot myself because I wanted to run sub 3 at London and didn't do that. I didn't have enough experience. It was always going to be close, but I just cooked it in the middle of the race and ended up burning out and kind of hitting the wall like a lot of people. So it's definitely running's an interesting one, because coming from a strength training background where a session in the gym is like an hour and you do like weights and then you rest. Running's a lot more constant. And I think what it teaches, what it's taught me very much so, is delayed gratification again, actually. Like having to be more patient, because the beauty of going to the gym is that when you lift weights, you immediately get bigger, right? If you get a pump on, you literally look bigger and more ripped in the hour that you do it. It gives you a glimpse into the future, but with running, that isn't the case at all. You finish a run and you don't feel very good usually. If it's a hard run, obviously. And during a marathon block, you obviously will run and run and run, and the sessions might feel harder and harder and harder as you get more and more fatigued, and you have to wait until then you've done a taper so that you're fresh to be able to then maybe get the feedback of, oh, I've done the right thing. And that might be 8, 12, 16, 20 weeks of training block, and you have to wait that long to see, did I hit my goal? Did I run faster? Did I hit the PB or whatever? And so I think like having the patience, running's really good for that too, for sure. That's definitely helped me.
What you said there, I think, is a really valuable point, is you didn't have enough experience in the beginning. And I think every run, every training block brings a whole new experience. And when you accumulate those together, that then has a substantial impact on the outcome, right? Yeah. And it's interesting how running's one of those sports where whatever time it may be, but let's just say more for your ability, where your ambition was to run a sub 3 and you don't hit that the first time. Isn't it interesting how we apply such pressure to ourselves that we become frustrated by the first attempt at something?
Yeah, I know.
When in reality, if you look at anything else that we do in life, the expectancy is never really to hit it the first time.
No.
Realistically, second, third, fourth, or fifth, but also we know that we have longevity, or at least we hope we do in this sport. So what is the rush? Is it more the emphasis on the validation from other people that your first attempt was to run a sub 3 and you achieved it? Because then the outlook is slightly different, right? Where if it's more personal, you're intending to run for the rest of your life. Even if it takes you 20 attempts at the marathon, you're still enjoying what it is that you love doing, right? Which is the running. Eventually you'll get to that point. Yeah. The problem then is the ambition was to run the sub 3. You achieved that goal. what do you do then? Like, is the ambition then to continue running faster? Because I think it gets to the point for certain individuals where the ambition then just is focused on one singular thing, which is time. Does that then deter away from the experience?
I did think about this, actually. I thought after London, well, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing that I didn't hit the goal. Maybe it's a good thing that I didn't run the perfect race. Maybe it's a good thing that, like after London, like as soon as I crossed the finish line, everything went into spasm. All of my muscles started spasming. I was lying on the floor, just convulsing, and had to get picked up by all the paramedics and carried into the tent because I was so depleted. I thought that first time I went for a wee after the race, I was like, oh, that's weird. Like there's still beetroot juice coming through my system because like I preloaded with beetroot juice and makes your urine go like a reddy purple color. And then I realized, oh no, it's not. That had all cleared out way before. I was that dehydrated that I was effectively urinating blood and protein, like on the edge of rhabdomyolysis, right? And I was like, well, maybe it's a good, like I definitely pushed myself. I couldn't have done it any faster. But it's a good thing, I think, because that failure actually teaches you a valuable lesson that you can't expect to be great at everything the first time. And in fact, failure is the first step in succeeding because it teaches you what you could do better next time. And I actually, after London, went into a training block for Florence Marathon, which was a couple of days ago, but I ended up not running because about 3 weeks before I tore my calf. And so I was like, I'm not going to go into it if I'm not actually fit to do it. So I kind of like pushed through and realized that, okay, I wanted to run the sub 3 at Florence. But then I was like, this isn't the right time. And you can't just chase something for the sake of chasing it. What's the more important thing within health and fitness for me is I want to be fit, healthy, and pain-free for the next 30, 40 years. Like as long as my mind is capable, I want my body to be capable too. And that's largely why I train the way that I train. I try to maintain as much muscle as I can. I try to be as fit as possible. And I'll have these challenges of like trying to run sub 3 as a motivator for that. But fundamentally, the most important thing is not getting hurt, is being able to live life and enjoy it as much as possible and retain that mobility. And like these days, I work with more people in their 30s and 40s that are trying to get that same thing. They're trying to be fit, healthy. They're trying to be mobile. They're trying to be pain-free. Like I work with a lot of busy people like solicitors and lawyers and, people that work in the city, because it is a case of like, that's one area of their life that they're really working hard in. And then they don't want to sacrifice the health, but it's really hard with the time side of things. So that's where like, I think my focus now in my mid-30s is, objectively, I'm still fit, I'm still healthy, I'm still strong and whatnot, but it's sustaining as much as possible as I continue and using these challenges as a motivator.
I'm so proud of you, and I've absolutely loved this conversation. I mean, I'm pretty sure you've just taken all those quotes from a book in your toilet. But nonetheless, the impact was just the same. But for anyone that follows your journey or were unaware of who you are, please go and see what David's doing. Like I said, what he's accomplished in such a short period of time within this running space is so inspiring. And I think the most important thing of all is so relatable. I mean, you can hear the way that he articulates himself in this conversation. I think for anybody, whether you're an intro level runner or you've been in this space for a long time, I think there's so many pieces there that you can connect with. And I think it's really exciting just to see where you go in this space. We've discussed the potential challenge for the future that you're considering. Whenever the time is right to pull the trigger on that, know that I'll be there running alongside you at some point whenever you need me. And brother, I wish you all the best and to remain as injury free as you possibly can be.
Thanks very much, mate. Appreciate it.
Cheers, brother.
Woo! If you enjoyed today's podcast, you fatted biscuit, all I ask of you in return is that you push that subscribe button and leave a review. Unless it's a bad one, you can keep that, you sausage. Your support, though, makes such a difference to this podcast and enables it to grow and connect with even more people around the world.